Straight talk from Israel. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
You're listening to the Tamar, Yonah Show here at Israel News Talk Radio. Well, you know what? My guest wanted to name this show, and appropriately so, because he's so much classier than I am. First of all, he's British, so there. My guest is British, so right there, he's classier than I am. But the title would be "Abroad, Anti-Semitism is Growing, and Jewish Leadership is Getting Weaker. What to do?" I was thinking to name this show, "I hate Jews, and I hate you, and I am good, and you are a racist. How to argue intelligently." You see his title so much more classier than mine. But basically, that's what we are going to be talking about today. Anti-Semitism and how to argue your point in a more classy way, so you can actually gain something from your argument. Because when you argue intelligently and with class, it doesn't have to be finger pointing and you're a racist and calling names and hurting feelings and just being cruel. And, well, I mean, we see what's going on today with people who support Trump and people who hate the Trump supporters, people who don't want to vaccinate because they want to wait, and people who say vaccinate because we're in a pandemic. How do people get their ideas shared to try to present to the other side so there can be understanding, maybe even change minds? And if not change minds, at least let them understand you and your position better without resorting at the end of arguments to either you're a racist or it's your fault or any other type of condemnations and finger pointing and cruel speech. By the way, you should see what's going on my Facebook page. Okay. With no further ado, we're going to be back with my classy British guest, Barry Shaw. Don't go anywhere.
How did a nice Jewish girl from Delaware end up living in Israel? Shalom, I'm Natalie Sapinski. Join me on my show, Returning Home. Meet different people who have moved to Israel. Hear their personal stories, their highs, their lows, and everything in between. Each week, we talk to experts on immigration and the process of moving to Israel. Listen to Returning Home every Thursday, only on Israel News Talk Radio.
All right, we are back here at the Tamar Yonah Show on IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com. And we're talking about anti-Semitism abroad is growing and Jewish leadership is getting weaker at the same time. What to do about that? Our guest is Barry Shaw. He's the International Public Diplomacy Director at the Israel Institute for Strategic Studies. His books include Fighting Hamas, BDS and Anti-Semitism, and 1917 From Palestine to Israel. He has other books as well. They're all available on Amazon or at your Steinmatsky bookstores in Israel. And you can visit his website called theviewfromisrael.com. And also, of course, he's on strategic-israel.org. Welcome to the show, Barry Shaw. Barry. Okay, I'm having a little bit of trouble getting Barry. All right. So we're having a little bit of internet problems here, not in our control. and we're going to try to get Barry on with us as soon as we can. So in the meantime, I want to tell you about. I want to talk with Barry about this as well, because, as I said, he's British, which automatically makes him classy. And I want to talk to him about arguing, and arguing in a positive way. You know, arguing, at least in the Jewish culture, is a value in the sense of when it's a constructive argument, when you're trying to get to the truth, when you're trying to repair things. It is a good thing, but it has to be done properly. Just like anything, eating is a good thing, but it has to be done properly. If you're going to be stuffing your face and with bad things, it's going to be a very harmful thing. And often arguments are heated, and they are a very negative thing in the sense of where it leaves your opponent. There is so much going on in the world today. We've got pandemics. We've got people who are out of work. We have governments that have changed, the leaderships that have changed, and there's a lot of movement and rearrangement, and that always hurts sometimes. You know, when you move around, things hurt. People get fired. People get moved over. New people come in. They may not know the job as well. A lot of things can happen. And the world, as it's going through this metamorphosis, are going to have people who are upset, and they're going to have some pushback, or they're going to be convinced by the media that this is the way to go, this is the mode today, this is the fashion, the style. And when you're bombarded with this 24/7, in the midst of a pandemic or some other social upheaval or any stress or trauma in your life, you may become very volatile and or emotional. And so we're going to learn what to do, hopefully, on this show as well, how to argue correctly. But do we have Barry back with us?
I'm here.
Okay. So, Barry, I want to go first with the anti-Semitic happenings that are going on around the world. We see Jews getting beat up in Europe, Jews getting beat up in the United States. I hear that Jews in the United States, especially in the Philadelphia area, are going out and even buying guns because they're so frightened about attacks on their families and businesses, etc. I think that even, if you don't talk about anti-Semitism, I understand that the Asians also with their businesses are protecting their businesses with guns now. It's a very volatile and scary time for many people around the world right now. And when you have pandemics and you have economies that are hurt, all historically have brought up anti-Semitism, the blame game, it's the Jews' fault. They find one Jew that's involved in it, even though 100 of them are non-Jews, but there's one Jew in there. It's the Jews' fault, and it's attacks on Jews, and we see attacks today. And some people are blaming the pandemic on the Jews, even though it has nothing to do with us, and they're blaming the hurt economies on us, even though Boris Johnson is not Jewish, and Macron is not Jewish, and Biden is not Jewish, et cetera, et cetera. But it doesn't matter, because the truth doesn't matter when you're hot and angry and you want to blame someone. So where would you like to start?
Yeah, well, I've been writing and speaking about this for decades, and it's basically the essence of a number of books that I've written. For instance, Israel Reclaiming the Narrative, Exposing the Big Lie and its Perpetrators, Fighting Hamas, BDS, and Anti-Semitism. And I'm recording what's been going on in the last few months because it's an extension of things that began many years ago. But in the essence of time, let me just give a couple of examples. In my opinion, the leadership of major countries, let's talk about Britain and the United States. The Jewish leadership in Britain and America is, in my opinion, rotten. and both have been hijacked by influential figures who are weak on affirmative Zionism and are welcoming to those who are on the side of the Jews who promote the narrative of our propaganda enemies. And to anybody listening to this about, well, we're talking about attacks on Jews, what's Israel got to do with it? It's a symbiotic hatred. You find, if you scratch an anti-Semite, you'll find an Israel hater. It goes on the time. So let me give you a British example. Some years ago, I was involved in a failed attempt to stop a well-funded group in Britain called Yahad from being invited to become members of the British Board of Deputies of British Jews. The Board of Deputies of British Jews is the overarching body that is supposed to be the official voice of British Jews. It connects with the British government and the media and claims to speak in the name of British Jews. They govern every aspect of Jewish life in Britain and increasingly speaks officially in the name of British Jews. So their voice, you would think, is important. But they rejected every claim not to allow a group whose only aim in life was to coordinate with left-wing Israeli groups like B'Tselem to bring Jewish students from Britain to visit anti-Israel Arabs and Bedouin and to return to Israel with a turn to Britain, with a jaundiced view of Israel. And yet, when myself and others objected because the Board of Deputies was supposed to be about issues concerning the Jewish community in Britain and that the rank and file of British Jews are mainly Zionists and support Israel, I was told that I, as an Israeli, should butt out of British Jewish affairs. And sadly, the acceptance of Yahad, they were accepted into the Board of Deputies of British Jews, and it was really an early symptom of what was to come. And the Board of Deputies is controlled by a hierarchy of wealthy Jews who call themselves the Jewish Leadership Council. They sit above the Board of Deputies of British Jews, which represents a lot of synagogues and Jewish organizations, but the decision makers are the JLC, the Jewish Leadership Council. And at that time, they were led by a man called Mick Davis and another one called Vivian Wyman. And Tamar, I attended a meeting at the Knesset when Mick Davis came to Jerusalem in order to tell the Israeli government that our actions at that time, dealing with Arab troublemakers and terrorists in Judea and Samaria, had become a problem for British Jews, and we should consider the consequences of our action on diaspora Jews.
Yeah.
And at that meeting, it was chaired by Einat Wilf. I was delighted when Einat Wilf, who was a Labour Party MK, who chaired the meeting, put him firmly in his place. So here we had a situation of my voice being closed down in London because I was no longer a British Jew, yet we had the dictatorial voice of the British Jews come to Jerusalem to dictate to us how we should conduct ourselves because it was causing him embarrassment and a problem over there. Actually, I want to tell you, it was his visit that turned Einat Wilf, who was quite a left-wing member of the Knesset at the time, into becoming a profound left-wing Israeli voice against a rising trend of non-Israeli Jews who were not only criticizing Israel, but had become anti-Israel activists. But since then, the Board of Deputies, and this is quite recently, has swung so far to the left that the application of the Manchester-based Zionist Central Council to the Board of Deputies was rejected. The Zionist Central Council has over 100 years of connection and Zionist activities with Israel, Tamar, going back to Chaim Weizmann. But the leftists within the Board of Deputies rejected their application. And instead, we've got a growing number of Jewish youths in Britain, like Tamar, who are well-funded, who not only attack the United Jewish Israel appeal that brings Jewish youths from Britain to experience Israel, but are hyperactive in promoting a message of Israeli occupation, and have on occasions, by the way, publicized themselves in gathering in public places like Parliament Square to say Kaddish for dead Palestinian terrorists. And now the same thing is happening in America, because immediately that Hamas began bombarding us with over 4,000 rockets, we saw a huge rise in anti-Jewish hate crimes throughout America, as well as Europe and Britain. Jews, as we saw, became the victims of the most vile verbal insults that descended into physical assaults. And in America, it was no coincidence that the worst cases took place in Democrat cities with large Muslim and black populations who went in search of Jews to express their hatred of Israel. And Jewish Greenblatt, the head of the Anti-Defamation League, said it's spreading like wildfire. And in the past, the Anti-Defamation League, that records hate crimes against Jews, has positioned some of the worst attacks against Jews to neo-Nazis and white punks.
Okay,
but they
Barry,
have to admit that this is the important point, Tamar.
Barry,
this year
we're going to a break. Sorry, you'll save that important point when we get back. Don't go anywhere, everybody.
Shalom, everybody. Making a difference often takes just one moment and one person at a time. I'm Orly Benny Davis, your show host on Israel News Talk Radios from Jerusalem with love. You'll be hearing people talking about politics, religion, social issues, and making a better tomorrow. Join me, Orly Benny Davis, for God and Country. From Jerusalem with love.
Wednesdays on Israel News Talk Radio.
We are back here at the Tamar Yonah Show on IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com, and our guest is Barry Shaw. And Barry, in the last segment, was talking about anti-Semitism in the diaspora outside of Israel, and you were just about to make an important point, Barry.
What I would say, well, the point I'm making is what I'm seeing in Europe and in the United States is that increasingly what we're seeing here is an intersectionality of what I call the Red-Green Alliance. What's the Red-Green Alliance? It is the political connection between the radical left of the politics in Britain and also in America, together with a rise in political influence of the Muslim migrants into these countries, who are making their feelings felt. And part of that is overriding one in support of the Palestinian movement, if you want to call it that, and the denial of any legitimacy of the Jews to any part of Israel. But this is hidden away in the lies they tell about Israel. What's been happening in America recently is something that I need to jump over to.
All right, Barry. Barry, we do have a caller. Can we take our caller?
Go ahead.
Okay, we have joining us Alan, calling in from the settlement of New York. Hi there, Alan. What's your comment or question for us here at Israel News Talk Radio?
Well, good morning, both of you. So there are two comments. One, Tamar, you talked about this rash of Jews getting beat up in America.
Yes.
There is now a video going viral about from this Arab human rights lawyer leading a rally in front of the home of a Jewish New Yorker. And because apparently he's making Aliyah, how she found out, I have no idea. But the rally was meant to intimidate him and accuse him and all Jews who make Aliyah of engaging in ethnic cleansing and war crimes for moving to Palestine. In case of Barry, you had mentioned that the United States the government is appointing terrible people to important positions. And just this past week, Joe Biden appointed Devorah Lipstadt, who used to be a very noted author on Holocaust studies. Right. And if you remember, in 2018, she endorsed for the U.S. Senate from Georgia, Raphael Warnock, a man who had a long history of bashing Israel. And just, I think it was yesterday, Sharon Kleinbaum, he appointed her to the Commissioner on International Religious Freedom. She is an anti-Zionist Jew to the left of J Street, and she lost progressive members of her quote-unquote synagogue because she was a sympathizer of the BDS movement. So if you want to know what's happening in America today, this is what's happening.
All right.
Yeah.
Barry, what do you have to say to what he...
Alan has expressed perfectly the drift that I'm addressing here. And if Alan would like to send me actual raw material, I'd be happy to study it and include it into the research for my upcoming book.
Great, Alan, thank you. Thank you for your call.
What Alan has said is that is we saw this that you had over there, Alan, in the States. I was looking for a really powerful affirmative kickback by grassroots Jews, both in Britain and in the United States, against the physical attacks that were going on in Jews in countries, in your country as well. Never saw it. The only thing I saw was a framed event in Washington, D.C., which was called the No Fear event, where I know that part of the organization, this event was hijacked by the progressive Jews, the liberal and reform Jews, the one that prevented affirmatively pro-Israel, pro-Jewish organizations from getting on the stage at D.C. And they didn't do anything to get an audience there, a large protest group of Jews who are fed up of not being represented and the American government not coming to their defense and helps them against the violence and the crime and the hate that's going on over there. And they basically had hundreds, not thousands, although one said that there was up to maybe 3,000, but the general view of some of the media, but the numbers were, and the audience were in the hundreds. But that's not important. What was important for some of the so-called American Jewish leaderships getting on the stage and pontificating about what it was all about. And I'll give you one example of the leftist reform rabbi, David Saperstein, who opened his remarks by diluting anti-Semitism by wrongly telling the people who were watching him that more hate crimes were being committed against black people than Jews. This is simply untrue in the sense that black people suffer greater numbers of violence against them, but the vast majority of crimes committed by other black people. So the truth of this Black Lives Matter message at a protest, which should represent exclusively the attacks of Jews in America right now, is, in my opinion, an abomination. And the leaders should have been addressing that and that alone. And yet, despite that, as Alan is saying over here, despite the fact that left progressives love to pose the problem of stemming from neo-Nazis and white supremacists, but the facts on the ground show that, in fact, the vast majority of the crimes are actually committed by, as I said, the Red-Green Alliance out on the streets that go insulting Jews, looking for Jews, and attacking them. And he was followed, Saperstein was followed by a Biden official who gave the main perpetrators of anti-Semitism a pass, blaming the hate crimes on the usual aspects, white people. And they came to the rally to continue their democratic critical race theory talking points. That's what annoys me. That's what annoys me, how the leadership in both Britain and the United States of the rank and file Jews are not represented, are not doing their job in my book. As one disappointed person who was there at Washington told me, it was beginning to sound like a Democrat rally with speaker after speaker using diversionary narratives to avoid the burning problem for Jews today in America. There were no prominent lawmakers, Democrat lawmakers, to speak out about the growing curse of anti-Semitism linked to hatred of Israel, which actually has taken root within their own caucus. And I pointed here in your previous programs, Tamar, the difference between what happened in Britain, where courageous UK politicians, a lot of those belonging to the Labour Party, publicly spoke up against the growing Jew hatred led in their Corbyn-led Labour Party a few years ago. There was no mention that anti-Semitism is a unique crime with a history of its own. There was no mention in America that the unique feature of an American anti-Semitism 2021 is that in almost every case, those who threatened and attacked Jews because they verbally trashed Israel. The link is there. Like I said, it's a hybrid link, and nobody in America seems to be addressing this. Instead, they get distracted by saying Jew hatred is the equivalent of Islamophobia and racism against blacks, and therefore it has to be bunched together. There is Islamophobia, and the Muslims have care to respond to them. They have Black Lives Matter represent the blacks. It seems that no Jewish leader in America is prepared to stand up and to speak exclusively on behalf of American Jews.
So, Barry, let me just ask you this. Isn't it a case of either, these Jewish organizations have been infiltrated by the left, number one, and number two, that the Jewish leadership there, their goal, I believe, unless you can, present to me something else that I can learn from here, that they want to preserve their Jewish life in the diaspora, and they don't want any waves, and they don't want any big upheavals, and therefore they're going to side with the majority there because they want to be accepted. They want to say, look, we're not so much for Israel, and like us, and we're really good people, because they want to preserve their what they have, their lifestyle, their possessions, their businesses, their life there.
Well, I can tell you because I've been in contact with a number of Jews who have been tapped both in Britain and in America. And this even-handedness that's been put out by the Jewish leadership in both countries won't wash. It's the equivalent of us over here of saying we have a legitimate case against Iran and finding the Biden administration wanting to follow the Obama administration is to sweet talk and appease the Iranians. You don't appease the people that want to kill you. And it's the same condition that the British Jews on the streets of Britain and also the American Jews are feeling, that they're under attack and they're looking to a leadership that is talking this wishy-washy nonsense about adopting the same approach to, we have to sublimate ourselves to Black Lives Matter and make sure to be alongside the Muslims who may be suffering from a certain amount of Islamophobia, when the statistics in America show overwhelmingly that the biggest hate crime in 2020, and absolutely certainly the biggest racial hate crime and religious hate crime in America 2021 is going to be against Jews. And therefore, where is the American leadership? And what is happening?
All right,
they have become less faithful to America, less faithful to Israel, and less faithful to the people, their constituents, the American Jews.
All right, Barry, we have to take a break, but when we get back, I want to ask you about the relationship now between the Israeli leadership here, representing the Jews in Israel, and our brothers and sisters in the States, the leadership there. We'll be right back, everybody.
You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
This is Shai Bentako, and each week I'll be webcasting to you from Judea, origin of the word Jew, a people besieged and beleaguered in every generation. Nazi Germany is but a memory, but in its place the world invented the phantom Palestinians as this generation's internationally authorized Jew killers. Tune in for a different slant on life in Israel, Phantom Nation, every Monday.
Hi, I'm Rabbi David Aaron. The soul basics are the most profound, the most essential, and yet often the most neglected in our education. Join me for Soul Talk on Israel's News Talk Radio and discover the secrets to love, spiritual growth, and personal power.
All right, we are back here at the Tamar Yonah Show on IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com, and our guest is Barry Shawn. We're talking about anti-Semitism. So, Barry, with this, what you were talking about in the last segments about the leadership really not representing the Jews or least for their safety and real interests, which is not just to continue their life as usual over there, but the Jewish people in the diaspora are only safer because we have in Israel. And when they turn against Israel in order to be with the in crowd because they think, well, if we take their side, we'll be more accepted, this is trouble. So how does Israel deal with this?
Well, quite frankly, if I go from past history, Israel, if you talk about Israel on behalf of the Israeli government, does very little. The Israeli government under Bibi or anybody before him never really got involved in the anti-Semitic attacks that have been going on in Europe. I'm thinking of people like places like Malmo in Sweden, France, in Paris, after terror attacks over there. Bibi went over and spoke to the Jews in Paris in the synagogues and invited them to make Aliyah. And actually, in a sense, it's a crude way of expressing it, but anti-Semitism in countries around Europe and in America, the positive result of that, it leads to a rising Aliyah of people who escape it and find refuge here in Israel. And there's nothing like Jews being attacked on the streets of New York or Los Angeles to make a Jew more Zionist. And what's happening in both countries is that the Jews see and are worried not only from the anti-Semitism, but the lack of leadership from the national leadership. There was no mention, for instance, of this so-called No Fear rally in Washington, D.C., that anti-Semitism is a unique hate crime with a history of its own. There was no mention that the unique features of American anti-Semitism 2021 is that almost every case, those who threatened and attacked Jews did so as they verbally trashed Israel. This is the symbiotism, this is the hybrid hatred that you can see everywhere you look. You can't have one without the other. No one on the stage there in Washington, D.C. advocated for the U.S. government to adopt the internationally recognized IHRS definition of anti-Semitism. There's never again message. No one got really behind the Jews and really spoke up for them. And this is a lot of the damage that was caused. In neither cases did you see in Washington, D.C., not the American flags flying alongside the Israeli flag with the symbolic Jewish Star of David. There was no singing of a tikva or Hand of the Heart American anthem to raise the spirits and unite the sparse crowd. In fact, there was no call for action. What it was leaders who were pontificating of how sympathetic they are as Jews who are suffering from the same, victims of the same hatred that other peoples are suffering from. And it's a dilution that's going on. And this void needs to be filled with affirmative Jewish activism. In Britain, what we saw when the Board of Deputies of British Jews failed to represent what was going on in each of the town of Britain, that individuals came out in order to confront the pro-Palestinian BDS people that were demonstrating outside businesses, selling Israeli goods outside the Jewish businesses. And they created grassroots groups. And you had, for instance, in the south of England, Sussex Friends of Israel. In the Manchester area, Northwest Friends of Israel. You had Essex Friends of Israel. All over Britain, Friends of Israel, grassroots groups grew out of the feeling that they were not underrepresented, if not representative at all, by the official leadership. And this is what's needed in America. And it's beginning. Because I can tell you in America, there's a bunch of very courageous women who formed Jexit. You heard of Brexit? This is Jexit with the J, who were speaking up on behalf of American Jews to get away from the party that is absorbing anti-Semitism within its body. That's named the Democrat Party. There's also a guy called Joseph Scutts in New York that is creating the American Israel Patriots. And these people can be helped by other organizations like Stand With Us, like Honest Reporting, like Palestine Media Watch, that were created over here in Israel by individuals who saw a need to fill a gap that the Israeli government and no Jewish leadership were covering. And I think it takes, as I write in my books, it takes a network to defeat a network. And we have to encourage and train and educate and support local groups of pro-Israel Jews who want to defend themselves and to represent themselves because they're not being led properly by the Jewish leadership in either country.
Okay.
Those who want to speak up, both on the internet and even on the street, they need to go out and rally and to make their voices heard. And if anybody wants to get involved in this, I invite them to contact me, and I will put you in touch with the local grassroots organizations that are spreading throughout many countries now because they've been failed by their official Jewish leadership.
Okay. So, Barry, I want to jump in now because, number one, I just want to apologize to our listeners that we won't be able to get to the another topic I wanted to talk about and how to argue, intelligently, but I'll be trying to do this right now, putting it into action. Barry, my feeling about this is that when someone has a disease in their family, it's a recurring disease, it's a hereditary, it's coming down all the time, you've got to watch out for signs and signals. And we don't have any time for callers, unfortunately, now. But, anti-Semitism has been plaguing us for centuries and centuries, and we've never been able to beat it because we don't have the numbers. And for whatever other reasons, we cannot beat anti-Semitism. It doesn't matter if we go out into the streets. It doesn't matter if we have the truth bias, because people who hate Jews are not interested in the truth. And you can put all the facts and the data in front of them, and it won't make one bit of difference. So I am saying, since we know that this disease of anti-Semitism runs in our family, so to speak, the Jewish people, the answer is to be strong. And to be strong is to be strong in our own country, in our own borders, here in Israel. And perhaps we are in the end of days where God is going to, as it says in the Torah, gather the Jewish people from the four corners of the earth and bring us back to Israel. And this is one of the ways that he's doing it. Some people are coming because they're just Zionists. They want to join their people, and other people are coming because, as you said, they're afraid. And whatever it is, whatever means God has to do in order to get our people here back in the land of Israel, this is the answer. People respect winners, and Israel is a winner. Israel is looked up to, not by the anti-Semites, but at other countries as an amazing miracle. And what we've done to this desert, and what we've done with our military, and what we've done with our agriculture, and what we've done with our science and technology, and all of the things that are coming out here, we will be stronger if we're here and trying to fight a fight outside of Israel in the diaspora in order to preserve your way of life that you're used to. It's just a failing path to go on, because this disease that can kill and has killed in our family, the Jewish people, of anti-Semitism, the answer is to come home to Israel and build our nation here. That's the 2 cents I'd like to put in. You have another 2 minutes for the show. Barry, how would you like to end it?
I'm not saying there's no anti-Semitism on the right. But basically, the Republican leadership and the Republican Party in general are more willing than the Democrats to call out such behavior among their own colleagues and distance themselves from it. This is the failure of the Democrat Party to reject and remove the anti-Semite and Israel haters from within their own rank. Even Jonathan Greenblatt, I mentioned before, the ADL CEO, admitted in a Newsweek column that the left has an anti-Semitic problem. This is in America. Anti-Semitism is increasingly the exception to the other things, and that is mainly on the left these days. It's fast becoming the rule. Most people on the left are not anti-Semites, but anti-Semites now hold most of the left's power. And it's past time for American Jews to move on from their traditional leaders and organization in favor of new ones willing to speak out and act out positively. And to make the noise that unfortunately their leadership is not doing.
All right. So again, the American Jews and the diaspora Jews need to protect themselves. But most importantly, I think that they need to wake up, because all the energy you're putting in trying to find leadership that's going to protect you over there, the fact is that you are the minority of the minority. and you're not going to be able to stand up to anti-Semitism. It's never worked in history, never, where we tried to fight and convince anti-Semites not to hate us so we can live peacefully and go on with life as we always did. The answer is to make Aliyah. That's my opinion. Barry, in the last 60 seconds, you can feel free to rebuttal what I'm saying or to add whatever you like.
Well, I want to add something, which is, a section for another program. Is sadly, that a lot of the Jews, especially the young Jews who are coming out of campus and everything, are becoming our worst enemy. They have really gone into the camp of the enemy. I call them the lost tribe of Israel. They have to find their moral compass, get an education, and come back on track. Because these people, when you have the Jews speaking up on the language of the enemy, and these are the enemies that hate Jews and hate Israel, you know you have a problem over there. And this is why groups like Jexit and American Israel Patriots and other groups like that are needed and must grow. And each city in America must create its own pro-Israel, pro-Jewish organization.
All right, we are out of time. Barry Shaw, thank you so much for being with us. And Jews around the world, protect yourselves and make Aliyah. Nefesh B'Nefesh, nbn.org.il, or write me, Tamar@IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com. Thanks for being with us, everyone.
Israel News Talk Radio's chat room. Just click the orange button at the top of the IsraelNewsTalkRadio.home page, log in as yourself or an anonymous guest, and join in on the fun. You'll meet other listeners from all over the world who listen to Israel News Talk Radio, and you can make new friends. Israel News Talk Radio's chat room. It's the closest you can get to being in the studio with us.
We love listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
Where can you get the inside news on Israel? At Israel News Talk Radio, we're dedicated to sharing Israel's inside story with the world by providing our listeners with news on Israeli politics, current affairs, and Israeli Jewish culture. The Israel News Talk Radio homepage also provides you, the listener, with useful information at your fingertips, with scrolling news headlines, weather, currency exchange, Shabbat candlelighting times, and so much more. Our radio programming is always accessible and on demand. We operate absolutely free of charge for everyone, everywhere. If you love what we do, partner with us now by becoming an Israel News Talk Radio supporter. With your support, you'll be inscribed on our Israel News Talk Radio Wall of Fame. There's nothing like us in the world. Be part of something great. Israel News Talk Radio. Straight talk from Israel.
If you love Israel News Talk Radio, then you'll love our Facebook page. We keep you up to date on what's happening in Israel, plus little surprise treasures that we don't share on the radio. Go now to follow us on Facebook. Just look for the Israel News Talk Radio Facebook page, and don't forget to subscribe and follow us by clicking on the like button. We post great stuff there that you'll want to share. Israel News Talk Radio on Facebook and Israel News Radio on Twitter.
News, opinion, and more. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.